And while empathy is valuable, it becomes toxic when it replaces your own truth. You're allowed to be angry. You're allowed to feel hurt. You're allowed to stop smiling when something inside you is breaking. That doesn't make you selfish. It makes you real. The work of integrating the shadow is not dramatic. It often happens in small, quiet ways. You pause before saying yes. You feel the heat rise in your chest and you don't push, not in grand declarations, but in everyday choices. Choosing rest over responsibility, choosing honesty over harmony, choosing presence over performance. Each choice is a step toward a life that fits your soul, not just your schedule. And slowly the fear begins to fade. You stop apologizing for needing space. You stop justifying your no. You stop editing yourself to be palatable. You begin to live not as a mirror but as a person. It is the subtle chronic erosion of your own identity in exchange for safety, approval, or love. At first it seems harmless, even virtuous. You say yes. You accommodate. You go along to avoid conflict. You become easy to be around. You get praised for being selfless, patient, kind. But over time, something strange starts to happen. You stop knowing what you want. You stop knowing what you feel. You stop recognizing you begin to live reactively, shaping yourself to fit others, avoiding rejection, anticipating needs you were never asked to fulfill. And the cost isn't just burnout. The cost is your sense of self. Jung would call this a distortion of the persona, the social mask you wear to function. In its healthy form, the persona allows you to adapt. But in its wounded form, it becomes a cage trapping your authentic self beneath layers of performance. This isn't theoretical. It's the woman who smiles at dinner while seething inside. The man who agrees to help while silently resenting it. The friend who listens to everyone but has no one who listens back. The child who learned long ago that being easy was the only way to be loved. People pleasers often don't realize what's happening until something breaks. A marriage collapses. A job becomes unbearable. A panic attack hits. The body speaks what the mouth has silenced for years. I can't keep doing this. Consider Daniel 45, a well-liked manager in a nonprofit. Thoughtful, responsive, always available. But underneath his helpfulness was chronic anxiety and emotional numbness. When asked what he wanted, not what others wanted from him, he paused. And then he said, I don't know. No one's asked me that in years. Not even me. That's the hidden cost. You can be liked, admired, needed, and somewhere along the way, you forget you were not born to be liked. You were born to be real. No one is born a people pleaser. The need to keep others happy, to say yes, even when you mean no, to smile, when you're hurting, these aren't traits. They're strategies, learned behaviors. And like most survival strategies, they begin early. In childhood, approval isn't a bonus, it's oxygen. As children, we depend on the adults around us not just for care, but for a sense. Who we are is mirrored back to us by how we're treated. And when love feels conditional, when it's tied to performance, obedience, silence, we learn to shape ourselves accordingly. Carl Jung understood this deeply. He believed the psyche adapts to survive. If the child's environment demands compliance, they will become compliant. If it rewards niceness and punishes need, they will become nice. If it withdraws love when they express anger or sadness, they will learn to bury those, not because they want to be fake, because being real was unsafe. This is the origin of the people pleaser, not weakness, not personality, wounded intelligence, a child's instinct to preserve connection at the cost of authenticity. We don't remember it happening. We only know that somewhere along the way we became the good kid, the easy one, the fixer, the caretaker, the emotional buffer in a home that didn't know how to hold tension. And it worked for a while, but the body remembers what the mind forgets. Years later, we begin to feel the weight of it: fatigue, resentment, disconnection from our own desires. We wonder why we can't say no, why we feel guilty for resting, why we over-explain and over-give. The answer lies not in the present behavior, but in the emotional contracts we made long ago. Susan was 41, a graphic designer, mother of two, married for 15 years. She came to therapy not because of any crisis, but because she felt, I'm doing everything right, she said. But I don't feel anything. I'm numb. Her days were full: work, parenting, errands, meals, chores. And she did it all without complaint. People called her strong, selfless, reliable. But she didn't feel strong. She felt invisible. In session, we explored her childhood. Her father had been emotionally distant. Her mother unpredictable, warm one moment, cold the next. Susan learned early that being quiet and helpful earned her praise, that showing anger got her punished, that expressing needs was risky, so she became good, hyper-capable, low maintenance. At 7 years old, this saved her. At 41, it was killing her spirit. She realized she had never outgrown the contract. If I keep everyone happy, I'll be safe. If I don't upset anyone, I'll be loved. And now, decades later, she was still following that rule at the expense of herself. This is the tragedy of the people pleaser. They often don't even know they're doing it because it's been normalized, celebrated even. Being easygoing, agreeable, helpful, it's rewarded in school and workplaces and in relationships. But no one sees the invisible cost. No one sees the child inside still waiting for permission to exist. Jung might say that the people pleaser is not living as a full self, but as a fragment, a self that was cut and shaped to survive in an environment where authenticity was not welcomed. But the psyche wants wholeness, and that desire will surface first as fatigue, then as resentment, and eventually as a breaking point. The mask begins to slip. The voice starts to tremble. The smile falters. This is not failure. It's the beginning, the return to what was lost, the right to say no, the right to feel anger, the right to be messy, loud, complex, and still worthy. The journey back to self begins with one question. What did I have to give up to be loved? And from there, the slow, courageous work of unlearning begins. By the time we reach adulthood, most of us have mastered. We know how to sound agreeable in meetings, how to swallow conflict at dinner, how to say I'm fine when we're anything but. And for the people pleaser, this performance is not occasional, it's constant, a way of life. Carl Jung called this socially constructed identity the persona, from the Latin word for mask. It's not inherently bad. The persona allows us to adapt, to play roles, to interact with society in functional ways. A teacher, a parent, a leader. These are all roles and we need them. But Jung warned of a danger when the persona is no longer a role you wear, but a self you become. When the mask fuses to your face, when your performance overtakes your presence. This is the quiet tragedy of the people pleaser. Over time, the mask becomes the only face they know. You don't know it's happening at first. You just want to do well, be liked. But little by little, your life becomes a series of adjustments. You mirror the room. You say yes to avoid guilt. You anticipate others' needs before they're spoken. You apologize for things that aren't your fault. And all the while, a subtle split begins to form inside you. There is the part of you who performs polite, reliable, appropriate, and the part of you who knows it's not real. This is where the exhaustion comes from, not from giving too much, but from being too, not from work, but from the work of pretending. Jonathan, 36, was a therapist. Empathetic, calm, deeply intuitive. He had helped countless clients navigate anxiety, depression, trauma. But in his own life, he struggled. He had trouble setting boundaries, even with friends. He said yes to everything. And when he felt drained, he blamed himself. In supervision, a colleague asked him, what would it feel like to disappoint someone? He froze. Then said, I don't deserve to be here. That's the core belief for many people pleasers. My worth is conditional on your comfort, on your approval, on your not being upset. This belief doesn't come from weakness. It comes from the persona, the performance self, that was necessary to navigate a world where being authentic once brought pain. It becomes a coping strategy so refined, so automatic, that it begins to feel like identity. But here's what Jung knew. Whatever is repressed doesn't disappear, it waits. The true self buried beneath the performance doesn't vanish. It watches, it waits, and eventually it begins to protest. That protest may sound like anxiety, or fatigue, or a quiet longing for something unnamed. You find yourself withdrawing from relationships that once felt nourishing. You resent people you used to rescue. You feel off even though nothing's visibly wrong. This is the sign that the mask is cracking. And at first, that crack feels terrifying. If you stop performing, who are you? If you stop making others comfortable, what's left? If you say no, will you still be loved? These aren't theoretical fears. They are somatic. The body tightens. The voice shakes. Guilt floods in like a tide. Because the persona has been in place for so long, anything outside it feels dangerous. But what lies outside it is not danger. It's you, not the curated, convenient version, not the adaptable, socially acceptable one. The messy, real, contradictory self you left behind long ago. Jung believed that the goal of psychological growth is not to discard the persona, but to disidentify from it. To remember that it is a tool, not a truth. A garment, not your skin. You are allowed to perform at work, to hold back in a crowded room, to adjust in a new space. But you are not meant to live there. Your life is not a stage. It is a relationship with yourself and with the world. And real relationship requires reality. The process of separating from the persona can be slow, even painful. You may lose people, or discover that the relationships you built while hiding your truth cannot survive your honesty. But you will also gain something immeasurable: clarity, peace, congruence. You will start to feel a subtle click when your words match your thoughts, when your actions match your values, when your face finally feels like your own. That is when you know the performance is ending. And the real story is just beginning. People pleasers are often described as warm, generous, and kind. They're the ones who show up, who stay late, who remember birthdays and smooth over awkward silences. They're patient, accommodating, easy to love. But beneath that smile, there is often something else, something silent and seething: rage. Not theatrical rage, not loud, public, uncontrollable rage. This is the quiet, buried kind, the kind that simmers behind the eyes, clenches, the jaw tightens the chest, but never gets spoken. Carl Jung would say this is the realm of the shadow, the parts of ourselves we cannot accept, so we push them out of sight. For the people pleaser, that means all the unacceptable feelings: anger, resentment, jealousy, disgust, entitlement, self-interest. You learned early on that expressing these feelings was dangerous, that to be loved you had to be agreeable, that nice people don't get angry, that kindness meant silence even when you were hurting. And so your rage didn't disappear, it just went underground. But buried emotions don't die. They distort. They leak out in passive-aggressive behavior, in bitterness, in sarcasm, disguised as jokes, and exhaustion that borders on despair. Sometimes they explode in ways that feel out of character, not because they don't belong to you, but because you never made space for them to exist. This is the hidden paradox of the people pleaser. They appear calm, but they carry an invisible war inside. Melissa, 43, was a school counselor and mother of three. She was admired by her colleagues, deeply trusted by her friends. She described herself as the rock, the one people came to for advice, support, reassurance. She never raised her voice, never lost control, until one night she did. After a minor disagreement with her teenage son over chores, she found herself screaming, loud, shaking, incoherent. Not just at him, but at everything: his tone, his mess, her husband's absence, the dishes in the sink, her own reflection in the hallway mirror. When she calmed down, she wept, not because she'd been angry, but because the anger felt so old. It wasn't about him, it was about years, decades of holding it in. This is the moment when the shadow speaks, when the self you've disowned comes forward, not to destroy, but to demand recognition, not to punish, but to remind you, I'm here too. Jung believed that shadow integration is not about taming the dark. It's about acknowledging it, making space for it, letting the parts of you that were banished come home. That includes your anger. Anger is not the enemy. Anger is a signal, a boundary alarm, a compass for unmet needs. When it's suppressed for too long, it turns inward, becomes self-hatred, chronic fatigue, even illness. But when honored, it becomes a guide. Anger says something feels unfair. Something has been too heavy for too long. Something inside you wants to be seen. Most people pleasers are not taught to listen to that voice. They're taught to override it, to rationalize, to minimize, to understand where the other person. You let yourself write the angry journal entry. You allow your truth to exist even if no one else affirms it. And over time, you notice something shift. The smile becomes softer, not performative, but sincere. The body loosens, not from suppression, but from honesty. The relationships deepen, not from harmony, but from truth. You stop needing to be liked all the time, because being liked is no longer your source of identity. You've reclaimed something deeper, your own voice. That voice may tremble at first, it may stutter, but it's yours. And once spoken, it will not be silenced again. It doesn't happen all at once. There's no breaking glass, no public meltdown, no dramatic exit. It happens slowly, quietly in the background of your life. You begin to wake up tired even after sleeping. You stare at your inbox, unable to care. You listen to your friend's story and feel strangely distant. You go through the motions, smiling on cue, answering messages, showing up, and yet something inside you is no longer there. This is the silent collapse. The moment the performance self begins to run on empty. Not because you're lazy, not because you're ungrateful, but because you've spent years living as a version of yourself that was never sustainable. Carl Jung understood. He warned that when we live too long through the persona, our socially constructed identity, we risk losing contact with the soul, the deeper self, the part of you that knows what you love, what you fear, what you long for. And the loss of that contact doesn't show up as loud despair. It shows up as numbness. Daniel 38, a nonprofit director and father of two, described it this way: I used to care about everything. Now I care about nothing. I'm still doing my job. I'm still there for my kids. But inside, it's like I'm watching my life through glass. He wasn't in crisis on the outside, but on the inside, he felt like a ghost. He didn't have the energy to rage or weep or scream, just a flatness, a constant sense that life had become a list of obligations, disconnected from joy, purpose, or even discomfort. This is what happens when people-pleasing becomes your personality. You build a life that looks good but feels empty. At first, you blame circumstances. You need more sleep, a vacation, a new routine. But rest doesn't fix it. Fun doesn't reach it. Because the emptiness is not about your schedule. It's about the disconnect between who you are and who you've been pretending to be. You've been on mute for so long, you've forgotten the sound of your own voice. Jung believed that the psyche rebels when we live out of alignment for too long. And that rebellion often takes the form of breakdown, not as a failure, but as a refusal to continue the lie. You may feel suddenly anxious without knowing why. You may find yourself crying over a commercial. You may snap at someone you love. Or more subtly, you may feel nothing. Not depressed in the clinical sense. Just not here. That is not weakness. That is a sign you're coming back to life. The silent collapse is painful, but it is also an opening. For the first time, you begin to see the cost of always being the strong one, the good one, the reasonable one. You realize that being the one everyone can count on has come at the cost of never counting on anyone else. You begin to feel what you've pushed away for years, resentment at being over-relied upon, sadness for the versions of you that were never chosen, grief for the time and energy spent shaping yourself into something digestible. And most frightening of all, you don't know who you are without it. This is not a crisis of productivity, it is a crisis of identity. The you who kept everything running, who made others comfortable, who showed up no matter what is falling apart. And what replaces it is not a new persona. Not yet. Just silence. But that silence is not empty. It is sacred. It is the space in which something real can begin to emerge. The collapse is not a problem to be fixed. It is a truth to be honored. It means the part of you that was over-functioning has finally said enough. It means you are no longer willing to live a life built on appeasement. It means you're ready to stop managing everyone else's emotions and start listening to your own. Yes, there may be consequences. You may disappoint people. You may step back from roles you once performed flawlessly. You may no longer be the one everyone leans on, but you will begin, and in that breath, something new begins to take shape. Not a better version of the pleaser, but someone whole. Someone with needs, with boundaries, with preferences. Someone willing to take up space, even if it makes others uncomfortable. Someone who doesn't just want to be liked, but wants to be true. Every people pleaser has made a contract. It wasn't written or spoken or even conscious. It was formed in childhood quietly and visibly, often in the moments no one else remembers, but your body never forgot. The contract goes something like this: if I keep you happy, you will not abandon me. If I don't express my needs, you won't punish me. If I take care of you, maybe someone will take care of me. We don't remember signing it. We only remember becoming the person it asked us to be. This is how the contract lives, in reflexive yeses, in the guilt of saying no, in the tension of wanting space, but offering comfort instead. It lives in over-apologizing, over-explaining, over-functioning. It shapes our posture, our tone, our entire emotional vocabulary. But eventually something breaks. Maybe you're not thanked for all you're giving. Maybe someone leaves you anyway. Maybe your own maybe you wake up and realize this contract has never really protected me. Carl Jung would call this moment the beginning of individuation, the breaking away from external roles and unconscious agreements in order to become psychologically whole. But before you can become, you must renounce. And renouncing the contract is not a performance. It's not about suddenly becoming rude or selfish. It's far subtler and harder than that. It means risking being misunderstood. It means tolerating guilt instead of avoiding it. It means grieving the version of yourself who believed being good was the only way to survive. Alexis 50 was a nurse, a mother, a wife, a daughter, everyone's caretaker. After her second health scare in 2 years, she began to question everything. Not just her workload, but her way of being. I realized I was living under a rule that said, you are not allowed to need. I didn't know where it came from, but it felt sacred. Like if I broke it, something bad would happen. Through therapy and long silent walks, she began to find the origin, a childhood with a chronically ill parent where she had to grow up fast. She became the helper, the strong one, the wise beyond her years daughter. Her reward was approval. Her cost was a stolen childhood. The contract was clear. If I'm needed, I'm safe. Breaking it meant facing the terror of being just herself with no role to perform. It felt like dying. But Alexis didn't die. She said no to weekend shifts. She asked her husband to carry more of the emotional labor. She let her adult children feel disappointed, and she stayed with the discomfort of that choice. I cried the first few times I did it, she said. But afterward, I felt honest. And I hadn't felt honest in years. This is how the contract breaks, not in grand declarations, but in small, consistent choices to choose yourself even when no one claps for it. You begin to notice your patterns in real time. That smile you force when you're uncomfortable. That sentence you swallow to keep the peace. That offer you make even when you're exhausted. And instead of performing, you pause. You stay present. You let the guilt rise and pass like a wave. You learn to sit in the space where the old reflex used to live. That space is scary, but it is also sacred. It's where the contract starts to unravel. And once you've broken it even once, you can never quite go back, because now you've tasted something rare, freedom from performance. And freedom once touched becomes something the soul refuses to forget. For the people pleaser, the word boundary often sounds like a threat. It carries echoes of danger, rejection, conflict, loss. The idea of saying no feels like risking everything, because for so long saying yes was your currency of connection. But here's what Carl Jung understood. When you live without boundaries, you live without a self. Boundaries are not walls. They are not punishments. They are the structure that makes authenticity possible. Without them, you become porous, taking in everyone else's expectations, emotions, and energy until there's nothing. And what rises in the rubble is a question that doesn't go away. What do I want? Not what will make them happy. Not what will keep the peace. Not what will get me approval. Just what feels true. This question is where the self begins. Setting boundaries is one of the first ways the new self learns to walk. It's not elegant at first. You will wobble. You will overcorrect. You may come off too harsh, then swing back into silence. Like a child learning to speak, you will find your rhythm in time. And here's what no one tells you. The first person who resists your boundaries is you. You've spent years ignoring your needs, softening your truth, absorbing discomfort. So when you begin to do something different, pause before agreeing, say no without explanation, leave a conversation that drains you, it won't feel empowering. It will feel wrong. You will hear the voices. That's self-neighbor, you're going to lose them. But none of those voices are your truth. They are echoes of the contract. And every time you choose not to obey them, your inner self grows a little stronger. Jacob, 46, was an operations director and the oldest son in a large family. His whole life, he'd been the one who holds it all together. When his marriage ended, he found himself overwhelmed not just by grief, but by how quickly everyone turned to him to be okay again. At first, he felt guilt, then relief, then something deeper, integrity. Not the kind you perform, but the kind you inhabit. the kind that comes from living in alignment with your actual needs, not your imagined role. This is what Jung meant by individuation, becoming a whole person, not an ideal one, not a pleasing one, but a real one. It doesn't mean you stop caring about people. It means you stop confusing love with compliance. You stop measuring connection by how little space you take up. We admire the nice ones, the generous, selfless, accommodating people who always say yes. They are the glue in families, the peacemakers in workplaces, the dependable ones in friendships. But behind that smile, behind the constant caretaking, there is often a truth no one sees. They're exhausted. And more than exhausted, they are disappearing. Because people-pleasing is not kindness. It is not compassion. It is self-abandonment in disguise. The people-pleasing self is built on adaptability. What do you need from me? Who do I need to become to be safe here? What part of me should I hide to avoid losing you? This survival logic works for a while, but eventually it collapses under its own weight. Because a life spent accommodating others leaves no room for you. I realized, he said, I didn't know how to say I can't. Not to my kids, not to my boss, not even to myself. So he started practicing something radical, being honest. He began by saying, I'm not available tonight. Then I don't have the capacity to talk right now. And eventually that doesn't work for me. Each sentence was a revolution, not because it offended others, most didn't push back, but because it broke the illusion that his worth came from being endlessly accessible. Boundaries don't end relationships. They clarify them. They reveal who honors your truth and who only wanted your usefulness. And more importantly, they show you that you're allowed to exist, fully, inconveniently, honestly. That is the birth of the self. And in doing so, you give others permission to do the same. For most of your life, you thought that shrinking kept you safe. You stayed quiet to avoid conflict. You smiled to be accepted. You made yourself convenient so you wouldn't be left behind. And somewhere along the way, you believed that taking up space, having needs, having boundaries, having a voice was a threat to love. That being big, bold, complicated, messy would cost you everything. So you made yourself small. Not in obvious ways, you still showed up, still achieved, still loved people well. But inside you were shrinking, dimming your light just enough to be tolerated, rounding your edges just enough to be manageable, editing your truth just enough to be liked. Carl Jung believed that the journey to wholeness was not about becoming someone else. It was about remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. And that remembering is not a return to innocence. It's a return to truth. Because here is the truth. You were never meant to be small. Your sensitivity, your intuition, your capacity to feel deeply, none of it was a flaw. None of it needs to be hidden. These are not liabilities to be managed. They are gifts that have been waiting for your permission to exist fully. But when you've spent a lifetime earning love by shrinking, expansion feels dangerous. Visibility feels vulnerable. Saying, this is who I am, feels like standing on the edge of a cliff with no one to catch you. That fear is real, but it's not permanent. It is the residue of a contract you no longer need. A contract that says love must be bought with compliance, that your worth is conditional on your usefulness, that taking care of yourself means letting others down. You don't have to honor that contract anymore. Not because you've become unkind, but because you've become awake. You see now that people-pleasing was not your personality, it was a pattern. A brilliant, adaptive, intelligent pattern that kept you safe when you were small. But you are not small anymore. You have outgrown the version of you who needed to hide. And now something else is rising. A voice that doesn't need to ask permission. A body that no longer flinches when it says no. A spirit that no longer feels guilty for taking up space. You don't need to be the easiest person in the room. You don't need to be the most agreeable, most accommodating, most selfless version of yourself. You just need to be honest with yourself first, and then slowly with the world. And here's what might surprise you. When you stop performing and start showing up as who you are, not everyone leaves. Some people draw closer, some relationships deepen, some mirrors reflect you more clearly, because now you're no longer building connections based on utility. You're building them based on truth. You stop trying to fit in and start belonging. You stop apologizing for being too much and start realizing you were never too much, only too real for a world that wasn't ready yet. But you are ready now. And the life you're creating is not one of perfection or ease or approval. It is one of alignment, integrity, and freedom. So if there is one thing to carry with you from this journey, let it be this. You were never meant to be small. Not in your voice, not in your presence, not in your love, not in your truth. You were meant to be whole.